My name is Rainer Münz. I'm representing a retail bank, Erste here. I was just wondering whether we could sort out the kind of problems that we're having and see what kind of mechanism is working. Because the UN Council in certain areas is working fine, as you can see in the Libya case. You just need then France and Britain to step in. And the UN Council is not working, Security Council is not working when you have entrenched interests of some of the member states that have a veto. The Middle East is a good example where you can see that part of the veto power of the US has nothing to do with the Middle East, but with the domestic political situation in the US on the ground, and you could think of similar. I mean, I'm just translating this into other. This just serves as an example. So, but the G20 cannot replace the Security Council, although the idea was that we need another body because the UN was seen by some of the people who were behind the G7, G8, and then the G20 as being dysfunctional. And the hope was that there would be a global leadership representing not whatever, 80% of the world GDP and the world population, and you can forget about the small countries, things like that. So we would have to sort out, it's probably easier to solve small conflicts. We are not good at nation building. Somalia and Afghanistan, I have to say, thoroughly show that our ability to destroy a certain government is much more developed than our ability to replace that government by something else. And Afghanistan is a particularly sorry thing because the violence and the casualties have emerged, have grown the longer we are there. There was almost no violence in 2002. When you see the areas, how many people died. The US only had 10,000 troops on the ground. We tend to forget about that we had a very small operation there before moving into Iraq. So the question is why and question is, what could something be done? I mean, you have mentioned Somalia, and you're absolutely right. It was the destruction of the livelihood of the fisheries that first led to the armed groups that tried to get rid of these fisher boats, but then they found out that you can make a business out of it. It goes well beyond it. I mean, closer to your home, the Straits of Malacca have also been plagued by pirates during a certain period of time. So there's, when you have, yeah, I know, and there are ways of cooking it down, but you need functioning governments in the neighborhood. If you would have a failed state in Malaysia, it would be very difficult. Yeah, just to put it that way. So I think one would try to just figure out what kind of conflicts can be, or what kind of problems can be solved with what kind of regime. And apparently we don't have the organization one size fits all, although the hope was in 1944, 45 that the United Nations would solve this once forever. The current crisis of the European Union shows the same. I mean, we have managed to overcome national, how you say, worries, but only because 26 of the 27 countries now think that the danger of the European Union falling apart creates a larger problem than having to take it home and to say, I have accepted that kind of compromise. Whereas in normal times when there's no danger, often the idea is when you go back home and say, I have to sell that compromise to my electorate, that's so dangerous, this is why you are blocking certain things. So there you can see that a crisis brings about a kind of integration move. I mean, we don't know whether it will take us there. We'll see how this new treaty arrangement or whatever intergovernmental cooperation that is envisioned among the 26 members will really get us to a mechanism that will be able to cope with government deficits. Because again, I mean, the problem that when you're facing re-election and you have a problem and you can borrow from the markets in order to bail out yourself as a government, this kind of moral hazard element will not go away. Just because the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg will be able to monitor whether you have implemented that law transformed into national law, because we still don't have a functioning sanction mechanism that is built into at least the agreement that was reached. So it remains to be seen. So far, it's the capital markets and the rating agencies that are playing that. And it shows a weakness of democratic governance when parliaments and elected governments are too weak to implement certain reforms that say the Black Knight threatening you has to come from the bondholder side, or the unwillingness of investors to buy your bonds. It's a kind of a governance failure that you could say that is built into. Mr. Cleary, you have just developed what has happened after 1989 and this, rise of democracies. But here we have an inherent weakness of democracies when it comes to long-term fiscal responsibility, apparently. You can always hope that the government that will be default is one that comes after you and you will no longer be in office. Yeah, that's a kind of, pushing the buck to the next generation in a way that we have been playing over the last. And in Greece, it has just come to an end, and then in Ireland for another reason. But if it would come to an end in the US, it would be terrible. For the world economy. There's countries like the US or France or Germany could never be bailed out by any mechanism we can think of today. So at least you would need a few responsible governments that would remain in order that you can deal with the smaller ones. I'm just trying to make the argument that we need to look, we need a better understanding what the issues are that we would like to solve, and then think about the governance structure that we would like to see in place. Then the other way around, to hope that we can establish a few like the G20. When the G20 was established, it was not clear exactly what kind of problems should be solved, except for saying some which are left over by the Security Council and other institutions. But I'm pretty sure that we would take it the other way. It would help us to take it the other way around. And then the group of non-aligned countries becomes irrelevant in that sense, because there's no East-West conflict left where you need a third party to stay neutral in order to mitigate or to play the envoy. And this is why the non-aligned countries have outlived their necessity, including a non-aligned, neutral country like Austria, where we are sitting here, which used to be a bridge between East and West. You no longer need that when the envoys can talk to each other directly. You don't even need a neutral. So it's the last thing that remains is when the US and Russia wants to exchange spies. It still takes place in places like Vienna.
It's very interesting. Just like a very interesting comment on working from the problem as opposed to necessarily the institution set. Just on the UN Security Council, I think it's, in some ways it's planned and designed to be frustrating, obviously, because of the veto power that's within it. One of the questions that I have is whether or not, although I spoke of a growing disconnect between sort of global power arrangements, global power distribution of power, and the actual permanent membership of the UN Security Council, it's unclear to me that it's yet facing a legitimacy crisis. And there's also a question of whether or not any alternative mechanism, given the questions of efficiency or effectiveness, when any enlargement would actually be any better at doing what the Security Council is supposed to do, which is to defend international peace and security. You can make the argument that it would create lots of gridlock and make it much harder to get sort of winning coalitions or blocking coalitions. On the other hand, you could make the argument that, well, if you got a few more capable countries there, they might actually invest in it. But it would very much depend on the identity of those countries, to say the least, and how big any enlargement would be. But go ahead, please.
Yeah, just one word, and it will be very short, concerning the problems set by the implementation of the measures. Just to take an example, finance one. I don't speak about corruption or, should say, illegal and fraudulent banking, but just a normal operation in banking operation. Everybody knows, after the problem set appeared in 2007 and the explosion in 2008, it was decided to try not to see that again. And in Basel, there was a Basel III recommendation, which were, should say, discussed at length by everybody, and they came back with, should say, some recommendation. The first thing once the recommendation from Basel III appeared, if you say, publicly, the first thing that the United States said that they will not implement them. Then the Latin American people say, are you crazy? Never will do that. The same for the Chinese. So now, the only people who will apply and who will implement these recommendations, which are pure, should say, common sense, will be the European banks and maybe the Japanese bank. Full stop. I think that here there is a real problem of leadership. And I cannot understand that a country like the United States refused to implement the Basel III recommendation. By the way, they don't even implemented the Basel II. I cannot understand that China, who has some, you say, ambition, decide not even to read them. And I think that we have to keep that in mind and to say it, at least. That's all.